Well, folks, here we're again for the weekly forecast. We have had off and on thunderstorm activity for the better part of this last week. In particular, the area that received the most generous moisture was portions of the Sandhill through central and south into portions of south central Nebraska, as successive waves on a daily basis rolled out of the Dakotas and moved south and southeastward toward the southern plains, and we've seen those same lines running over the same areas. And in fact, until we got into late Wednesday night into Thursday, it didn't seem like the precipitation could get any farther east there than a line from about York eastward. That area was receiving nothing in the way of significant moisture, and then of course we've seen the frontal boundary pass through, and we got some decent moisture across portions of northeast and east central Nebraska, particularly along the Missouri River Basin where we desperately needed it. But in the same token, we have seen this area completely degrade over the last 30 to 45 days in response to below normal precipitation, and the improving conditions have been showing up more in the central and western part of the state through these excessive storm systems that have moved through. And in fact, over this last week, in the central Sandhills region, particularly as you get into that Thedford area, some locations received in excess of 4 inches, and I think the highest total that I've seen over this last 7-day period was a little over 5 inches in the Dunning area. So we welcome the moisture. There's a lot more that's going to be needed in order to completely alleviate the drought, and certainly we need to start seeing some pickup in precipitation across eastern Nebraska. So let's take a perspective of what all of this means in regards to the Drought Monitor. And the latest Drought Monitor that goes through Tuesday morning is indicating the expansion of dryness in through the eastern part of Nebraska, and also you're starting to see that materialize in Iowa, and we're starting to see abnormal dryness spreading into the northern Corn Belt in response to below normal precipitations. And we're seeing the improving conditions across the central Sandhills, and then some limited improvement across the Panhandle. Now, when we entered the spring, almost 90% of the state was either in D4 or D3 conditions, exceptional or extreme drought. We're now down to about 20% of the state that is now in extreme drought. We've basically removed almost all the exceptional drought. And so we are seeing the improving conditions, and it's going to take considerably more moisture for us to get rid of the remainder portion of this drought, but at least we're seeing improvements. Now, if we look at the result of this, we've been seeing a persistent cold pattern. We've had that upper air trough that's sitting over southern Canada that's been rotating energy around and kept us exceptionally cold. We're running 3 to 5 degrees below normal for the last 30-day period. And that's probably helped us somewhat because this really very dry conditions that have developed most of Iowa, eastern Nebraska, and points to our east, really has us concerned in regards to what it may do to yields, and I think the cool conditions have helped alleviate the real detrimental conditions that may have existed if we'd had similar temperature conditions as we did last summer. So as we go forward, and this would be from today through the next week, we're going to be looking for thunderstorm activity, but there's really not a lot on the horizon. We're going to start to see that ridge build in. You can see that a big upper air trough has kind of moved out of the picture. We're seeing a trough moving into the Pacific Northwest, and ridging pattern is going to be the dominant feature at least through the good portion of this week. So we're not expecting any precipitation today. We expect it to start to warm up rather dramatically, and it will be persistent through the week as this ridge slowly expands eastward. And you can see that the ridge is centered over the southern Rockies, and it's going to be pushing out into the central plains. And as we get into Monday, we'll see that ridge expanding into the central Corn Belt. As we get into Tuesday, we'll notice that it envelops the entire Corn Belt, and all the main energy remains up in the Dakotas and to our north. As we get into Wednesday, there is that trough starting to move in, so we might get an isolated thunderstorm developing in the Panhandle. A little bit better chance as we get into the day Thursday as that energy gets a little bit closer, but most of eastern Nebraska remains high and dry. And then as we get into Friday, that trough slips in a little bit farther, and there is indication we might break out some precipitation. So for the temperature forecast, pretty consistent. We're going to be remaining into the lower 90s across most of western Nebraska, and upper 80s to low 90s across eastern Nebraska. So we go to the 8 to 14-day forecast. That ridge stays in place at least to the end of the month, and in terms of precipitation with that ridge, of course, we do expect drier than normal conditions.